Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, the government in the Philippines shuts down half the country's mines. But can the world's largest producer of nickel ore really live without its metals industry? Also this week, you've heard of fake news, but what about fake ads? We'll take a look at the world of global digital advertising, find out how advertisers could be handing over money to fraudsters. Plus, docile crocodiles, how the tourism board in Gambia plans to use these friendly reptiles to lure back tourists. But let's start this week with a look at a battle that's brewing in the Philippines between the government and the mining industry. On the surface, it seems like a simple environmental story. President Rodrigo Duterte's government has shut down over half the country's mines permanently. His environment minister said that it's because of its unique ecosystem. The Philippines is simply unfit for mining. The mining companies want the government to publish the environmental audit that's brought the industry to a grinding halt. They say the closures are too drastic, that mining policy isn't coherent, and that there could be knock-on effects elsewhere. But mining contributes less than 1% to the Philippines' economy. Well, even though the Philippines says that it can live without its mining industry, the rest of the world still felt the impact. The Philippines is the world's biggest supplier of nickel ore, and the crackdown has pushed up global prices for this key ingredient of stainless steel. Nickel, copper and zinc are examples of base metals. Copper is often called Dr. Copper. That's because all base metals, and copper in particular, act as a kind of weather vane for the global economy. They're used in almost every industry, and so if prices are falling, they can signal weakness to come, sometimes even before the official data is out. Well, joining us now from London is Caroline Bain. She's the chief commodities economist with London-based Capital Economics. Caroline's also the author of The Economist Guide to Commodities. Great to have you with us, Caroline. What do you make of what the Philippines government has done here?
We actually think there are going to be appeals against their ruling. It might be that the impact is less than it appears on paper, but as it stands now, they're cutting off about 8% of global nickel supply, with huge implications given that the Philippines supplies around 97% of China's nickel. So this is a major disruption for the nickel market. Of course, we mustn't forget that the reason for these closures, or the order to close these mines, is on environmental grounds. The Philippines nickel industry has grown very rapidly in the last couple of years to fill a gap left by Indonesia banning exports. In some cases, mines have been built without due regard to the environment. And I would add, though, that other mines have got international certificates for their environmental standards. So it is a mixed bag, but it seems that it can be justified to some extent on environmental grounds, and the loss to GDP would be offset by that.
The Philippines, of course, one of the world's major suppliers of nickel ore. What will be the impact of any shortage in the material? I mean, what's it used for? What are the implications of all of this going to be for nickel ore consumers?
Well, about 70% of the world's nickel is actually used to make stainless steel. So that would be the primary impact on the stainless steel market. It also has a lot of more niche uses that are, if you like, almost more strategic. It's used a lot in aerospace, in green batteries, in chemicals. So there are considerable ramifications, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, for China, given the size of its stainless steel industry.
As you said earlier, this row is far from over, although the President, Duterte, says that he can do without these mines. No one knows what's going to happen in 6 months, of course, but say, for instance, there is a world shortage, a global shortage of nickel ore. What's going to happen? Are we going to find the price of dishwashers, for instance, going up?
Not immediately, anyway. If it was a 6-month hiatus, the longer-term impact wouldn't be very great because, as I mentioned earlier, there are very high stocks of refined nickel. adding into the pot, if you like, of what's going on in the nickel market, Indonesia recently announced a partial lifting of its ban on ore exports. So we are expecting higher volumes to be coming out of Indonesia over the next few months, which will to some extent offset the loss of Philippine ore.
So the Philippines says that it can do without its mining industry. President Duterte appears to be quite happy about that, and yet it is the world's major supplier of nickel ore. To what extent does nickel ore mining underpin the economy?
It doesn't really. It's less than 1% of GDP. Certainly we feel President Duterte has said that he can live with the whole mining sector closing down. Total mining is probably about 1 to 1.5% of GDP. Having said that, it does employ estimates of over 1 million people, so that is quite a considerable amount of labour that could be lost, or jobs that could be lost. In terms of exports, the mining sector is more important. Nickel exports are about 8% of total exports. But I suppose, and certainly it seems to be the President's view, that they can live with halving that contribution to GDP. The reason that they're enacting these closures is on environmental grounds. So it can be justified by the need to clean up the environment.
All right, so the Philippines can live without its mining industry. What about the rest of us? Can we live without the Philippines' nickel ore? I
think there will definitely be short-term disruption. The world has got used to having this Philippines ore. But there are alternative suppliers. China already has been diversifying its supply base a bit, particularly with imports from New Caledonia. Of course, the mining sector always takes longer than most sectors to adjust to supply disruptions, because it takes so long from the plan to dig a mine, and to it actually starting to produce ore. But in the longer term, alternative suppliers will be found.
Caroline, great to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Thanks for being with us.
You're welcome.
Well, staying with mining, the biggest mining conference in Africa took place this week in Cape Town. South Africa is the source of 1/3 of all the gold that's ever been taken from the ground. But many mining companies are now pulling out. Al Jazeera's Tanya Page takes a look at what impact that's having on communities of former miners.
The machinery at Blyford gold mine fell silent 4 years ago. Around 1,700 people lost their jobs. They say they feel abandoned by their employer and the South African government, which is refusing to help.
Who's going to come out and say I'm responsible? Nobody's going to say I'm responsible. So basically what I'm saying to you is the community is by itself. They are in the no man's land.
When the mining company Village Main Reef moved out, the criminals moved in, vandalising the buildings and stealing cables to sell the metal. Former employees patrol the abandoned mine, hoping a new owner will give them a job. So far, theirs are the only footsteps to be heard here. Some find it hard to believe government promises that their interests are a priority at the biggest mining conference on the continent.
As we move mining forward, let us take everyone along and ensure that indeed the mineral wealth beneath our soil benefit all South Africans.
The government has also angered the mining industry by suggesting 26% of mines should be permanently owned by black people as a way to share resource wealth. Black ownership has its own critics among community groups who say it will only be good for a small number of wealthy black people. The issue of how to ensure black communities benefit from mining is central to this conference. But the problem for struggling communities like the one in Blyford is that smartly dressed delegates talking about the issues doesn't change their reality, in which they continue to feel forgotten. The government proposal of 26% black ownership is being challenged in the courts.
Well, it's very easy to point fingers at the industry for not having done enough, but we can equally point fingers at local government, at national government, at communities themselves for not having done enough in terms of the partnerships that are required to get the outcomes that we need.
Back in Blyford, former miners try their hand at sewing to make ends meet. And they're moving thousands of employment records to a safer place, hoping that soon someone takes as much care of their future as they're doing of their past.
Tanya Page in Cape Town, you're with Counting the Cost from Al Jazeera. Still to come, a standoff between the top producer of avocados and its biggest customer. Why tariffs could drive up prices for Mexico's green gold. But first, Gambia's tourism board is hoping to convince the new government to fund an advertising campaign. The idea to lure back tourists after the recent political crisis. And the country's crocodiles form part of that plan. Reza Sayah reports from Banjul.
They may look menacing, but with a little guidance from professional handlers, you just may gather the courage to take one of the century-old crocodiles at Kachikali Crocodile Pond for a little walk.
Some of them will be even touching crying, but some will be touching with, happiness and joy. They won't even believe that they're touching a crocodile.
It's what makes Kachikali one of the top tourist attractions in Gambia's capital, Banjul. But these days, the crocodile pond is quiet.
Everything went.
So is the monkey park. Banjul's beaches are deserted, hotels are mostly vacant, and souvenir stores are empty. It all began when former leader Yahya Jammeh refused to give up power after he lost the presidential election in December. That led to a state of emergency in political turmoil that forced thousands of tourists to rush back home.
It seems that the entire world was coming to an end.
Abduli Haidara, head of the tourism board, says Gambia averages around 4,000 tourists a week during its peak month of January. Almost all of them evacuated within days.
That was the beginning of the nightmare that we went through.
To this day, a tourism industry that generates 20% of the government's revenue is still suffering. But with new President Adama Barrow's peaceful return from exile, tourism is starting its comeback.
Right now is the perfect opportunity for us.
The tourism board plans to ask the new government for an increase in advertising money to help convince travelers why they should come back to Gambia's pristine beaches, nature reserves, and exotic tourist attractions. Gambia's tourist attractions are certainly fun, but many say Gambia's best feature are its people. Some of the most hospitable, most fun-loving people you'll ever meet.
I think it's the way we are brought up.
It's why Gambia is called the smiling coast of West Africa.
There is no country on earth that is so peaceful.
So peaceful, even the crocodiles seem friendly.
Reza Sayah, rather him than me. Now, advertisers around the world are coughing up more and more cash to capture our digital attention. For example, US advertisers spent $17.6 billion on digital ads in the last quarter alone. That's according to the Internet Advertising Bureau. That figure's even bigger if you look at the global picture, and it's likely to keep growing. Even the ad industry itself has become more digital dependent. The way ads are bought and placed online is often done through automated technology. But there is a problem in this brand new world. Advertisers often end up paying for fake ads. They happen like this. The automated way that advertisers buy ad space and the automated programs that digital media companies use to sell ads can be fooled. And who's committing this fraud? Well, it's other computer programs. They pull ad revenue towards fake websites. Of course, advertisers want humans to see their ads and not computer programs, so-called bots, which aim to rack up page impressions on fake sites. The biggest digital ad fraud ever uncovered is known as the MethBot fraud. Hackers are thought to have made as much as $5 million a day by faking video views and exploiting the pay-per-click system. And advertisers, understandably, don't want to hand over cash invested in their brands to fraudsters. Well, joining us now from Dublin via Skype, David Murphy, the head of digital media solutions at the Irish Times. David, good to have you with us on Counting the Cost. What do we mean here by fake ads?
So by fake ads, it's mostly got to do with ad fraud. So it tends to be invalid traffic that's created by bots as opposed to humans. And those bots would generate ad impressions or engagement or clicks on ads. In an automated way, as opposed to humans being exposed to those ads and interacting with them.
So who's being hurt most here? Is it the brands themselves or the companies that are hosting the ads?
Yeah. The main companies, or I suppose the main companies that are being affected by ad fraud are the advertising, the media agencies specifically, and the brands themselves. To a degree, premium publishers don't tend to get involved in any kind of tactics that would create invalid traffic on their website or fraudulent traffic on their website. It tends to be a problem that occurs with a long tail of websites that can go into the hundreds of thousands that tend to monetize their ad inventory through networks. And they fake both the content, well, they can fake the content and the type of audience they have. And because a lot of that traffic is being bought in a very automated way, the media buyers or the media buying agency doesn't really have a way of determining whether or not they're buying a high quality, real, genuine visitor on a proper high quality website, or if they're buying a fraudulent or potentially fraudulent bot traffic on one of these long tail of the hundreds and thousands of sites that exist on the web.
So just how big a problem is this?
It kind of varies from country to country. I have seen reports saying that a lot of times, sometimes 30–40% of total ads served are being served via bots or served to bots, which is it's a tremendously huge problem. I think one of the most recent cases, a group of Russian hackers called Ad Fraud Commander, were registering thousands of different domains, and they were faking themselves to be premium publishers. Then at the same time, they were using networks of bots to generate a lot of ad impressions. Now, because video ad impressions tends to be, or is actually one of the most in-demand type of digital ad inventory available at the moment, they were generating upwards of 300 million ad views per day. Now, based on the typical selling rates per thousand rates that those type of ad impressions go for, which tends to be around $13 per thousand, they estimate that that group was fraudulently taking between 3 million to 5 million US dollars out of ad exchanges every day. And that was money that was coming from both the advertising agencies and ultimately the brands who were paying to access those audiences.
I mean, that's a massive amount of money. Is the industry taking this issue seriously enough?
I think at the moment there isn't really any silver bullet that solves the problem of ad fraud. The issue is that whenever a technology is developed to help detect fraudulent traffic, the hackers and programmers then modify their bots to make them act more human. So to a degree, it is a little bit of a case where they're playing cat and mouse at all times. I know that a lot of the larger media agencies have recently created positions that are basically tasked with the brand safety, the viewability, and also looking at ways of identifying fraudulent traffic. A lot of agencies as well, the advertising agencies, will tend to, the ones that really care about ad fraud, are putting less emphasis on the network and programmatic buys and focusing more on, I suppose, more the premium brands and premium alliances to ensure that they know that the ads that they are buying are being served to actual people.
How does this impact upon you and me, David, the public?
I suppose for the general public, it doesn't really impact them that much. The only people in the public that it may impact is people who work for companies that do depend on advertising revenue to support their businesses. In those cases, those type of companies are losing money as a consequence of these larger networks that are creating invalid and fraudulent traffic. And as a consequence, often they can't pay their employees the same wages, or they can't retain them for such a long period of time. It doesn't affect the general population, but there are definitely people who are being impacted on a day-to-day basis as a consequence of people who are illegally, I suppose, taking advertising dollars and advertising spend away from the businesses that they work for.
David, the advertising industry is undergoing rapid change. So much of the ad spend today goes online. How's that impacting the industry?
Yeah, it is kind of difficult. Like the most recent report in the US, I think for Q3 of last year, showed there was 20% year-on-year growth, which is amazing considering digital has been around for so long now. Like it's been growing quite substantially and rapidly for the last 15 years or so. But when you look at where that growth is happening, more than well, I suppose Google have grown more than 55% or 54%, sorry, in the US in that quarter. Facebook grew 45%, but all the rest of the publishers combined just grew 1%. So to a degree, it is a duopoly between those two organizations who are taking the vast majority of ad spend. But to a degree, they're also driving, or they're also enabling both brands and, I suppose, direct advertisers to very easily advertise their products and services online in a very easy to do and cost-effective way.
I'm going to ask you to gaze into a crystal ball now, David. What does the future hold for the industry? How do you think it's going to evolve in the digital world?
In terms of evolution, large networks and programmatic buying and social media will always have a very important place to play, or a very important part of the digital advertising mix. For a lot of premium publishers who are struggling because there are two primarily dominant companies operating in the space, a lot of them are now starting to form alliances and allegiances where they start pooling their data together to offer advertisers better value, but also in brand safe and trusted environments. So that would include organizations like Laplace Media in France and most recently Pangea Media in the UK, which would comprise of the likes of The Guardian, Economist, Financial Times, and a few others.
David, are Facebook and Google helping advertisers to address their problems with digital?
To a degree, the Facebook and Google are doing a fantastic job of enabling a lot of the smaller publishers to monetize their inventory, whether that be through the Google Display Network or whether it be on Facebook, where people are placing up instant articles and monetizing their content in that way. It does still mean that they are getting a piece of the pie, but for a lot of publishers, they do still play a very important role in contributing to their success. But for some of the larger publishers, that makes up a very small proportion of their advertising revenues. They still need to sell quite a lot directly and deal directly with both brands and the media agencies.
Good to talk to you, David. Many thanks. Finally this week, Mexico is the world's #1 producer of avocados. The US is its biggest market. But as the Trump administration threatens to change a free trade deal, Mexican producers are worried about their future. John Holman reports.
In the state of Michoacan, southwest Mexico, they call it green gold, avocados. Mexico's the top producer of the fruit, and the US is its biggest customer. Donald Trump's threatening to change or rip up NAFTA, the free trade agreement between the US, Mexico and Canada. That would mean border taxes for imports, including avocados, that Trump has floated could be as high as 20%.
Services, tourism.
We asked someone who helped negotiate the original NAFTA deal if that's possible.
He cannot do it. So that will not happen. I mean, imposing a duty on 20% on Mexican agricultural products is, I mean, he has no powers to do it. So it's an empty threat.
Economists told us the highest duty the US could impose on avocados is around 7%. That's still an increase that US guacamole lovers would have to pay.
The biggest impact will be on the US consumers. They will share the cost with the producers.
Workers here are concerned more expensive avocados could mean fewer sales and jobs.
Because people are scared right now. Because of price and it's bad.
They and US consumers can only wait to see how the upcoming trade negotiations will hit their green gold.
John Holman in Mexico, ending our show for this week. There's much more for you, though, online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and indeed entire episodes for you to catch up on. You can also get in touch with us on Twitter. @AFinnegan is me. Please use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or you can drop us an email, countingthecost@aljazeera.net, our address. That's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news is next on Al Jazeera.